Good evening or afternoon, depending where you are. Welcome to our latest gallery talk, moderated by me, Dr. Jacqueline Hudson, the exposition's content developer at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. This virtual program is an extension of the exhibit Textures, the History and the Art of Black Hair, which explores Black hair and its important, complicated place in the history of African American life and culture. This exhibit is running now until Sunday, August 14th, 2022 at the Kent State University Museum at Kent State University. Today, we have the honor of having the co-creators of the exhibit, Dr. Joseph Underwood and Dr. Tamika Ellington. We also have Ms. Keva Davis, advanced licensed cosmetologist, owner and operator at Beauty by Trinity Professional Salon, LLC in Cincinnati, Ohio. While Dr. Underwood and Dr. Ellington each make a presentation, Ms. Davis will be performing a live demonstration. But first, I want Ms. Davis to start by briefly discussing her own perspective as a hairstylist on the importance of Black hair in the history of African American life and culture. Ms. Davis?
Thank you. I absolutely love what I do. I'm a second generation hairstylist, and I've always been able to have the opportunity to nurture and care for natural hair, is what it's called now. And I believe that it's important to understand the history of hair of Black hair, in order for everyone to be able to understand how to take care of their own hair, as well as to help us in the hairstyling community, help you take care of your hair. It's so very important to know the origins of grease, the origins of the proper combs to use to detangle your hair. So I'm excited that this exhibit was put together by the doctors. I applaud you for going and researching and giving us information for those of us who did not know and those of us who want to learn more. So I appreciate that. Today I'm going to be doing a rendition of something that may have been worn back then on my model today. So as they speak, just watch. If you have any questions, there'll be times where you can do that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Now, Dr. Underwood and Dr. Ellington will each present their perspectives on Black hair.
Okay, hi everyone. We are so happy to be here and presenting this for you this evening. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and invitation, Dr. Hudson. We are going to do the presentation in two halves. I'm going to speak a little bit about the significance of hair on the African continent among different ethnic groups. And then Dr. Ellington will join on for the second half of the presentation to talk about what it looked like once people arrived to the New World, kind of after the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. So as we began researching this topic in order to make it into an exhibition of art and artifacts, we looked at the legacy of an important exhibition that happened in that should say the year 2000, not 2020, the year 2000, called Hair in African Art and Culture. This was put up and exhibited by the now defunct Museum for African Art in New York City. And it was one of the first big exhibitions that really looked at hair across Africa. Textures comes over 20 years later, which is far too long for such a complex topic to not be discussed in museum settings. So what is new? Textures is a much larger exhibition. It also focuses a lot on contemporary art. We have 55 named artists from Africa, the Caribbean, other parts of the African diaspora. We also have a very global focus, whereas the original exhibition just focused on African nations and people groups. Ours looks at Africa, the United States, the Caribbean. It's kind of a global story. Ours also addresses material culture in a different way. We looked at a lot of the tools and combs and products that have been invented in different cultures and throughout history to shape and define different Black hairstyles. Of course, both exhibitions think about history. They both go back to the African continent and look at the rich traditions of the many different ethnic and people groups. Though I will say ours does start earlier chronologically with a focus on Egypt. So we cannot ignore the role of Egypt in shaping the history of Africa. Africa is indeed part of the Egyptian continent, even though so many histories are more likely to connect it to places like Greece and Rome or even the Middle East. But actually, Egypt was a hub for sub-Saharan Africa, where religions, goods, ideas, and styles of even hair, as you see here, this man with a tight curly hairstyle, passed through Egypt into sub-Saharan Africa. So Egypt is part of Africa and part of Black history. Two of the god figures that are included in the Textures exhibition are Isis and Khonshu. According to mythology, Isis left Egypt to search for her missing husband, only to lose hope at the shore of a river. Amidst her grief and her mourning, some maidens approached her and they started to comfort her. They taught her how to care for her hair and how to plait it, so a form of braiding. And as one of the most prominent maternal figures in Egyptian mythology, Isis's story is significant. It tells us about how common hair care practices were communal, and it's also a nod to the invention of braids, which are traced back to Egypt. The fellow deity there on the right, Khonshu, is famous for his distinctive hairstyle, a single lock that you see comes out the side of his head. This style was associated with youthfulness, and it was popularly worn by children. So as the Egyptian deity of the moon, Khonshu is connected to women's fertility and their cycle. Another kind of connection why he would have this side lock of youth hairstyle, also being one of the younger gods. So thousands of years ago, tracing back to ancient Egypt, we already see that hair is sending messages. It's communicating something about the people, what they believe, who they are to others. And so this legacy is long across the history of Africa. Whether we look at Nefertiti, who was famed for her beauty, and you see here this plaited or braided hairstyle, or even the fact that you might take a bundle of hair extensions into the afterlife. You know, what if you need it in your tomb? This is something that you would take along with you, along with your servants or goods. Why was hair so significant that it had to be planned in advance like that? Why is it part of your estate planning? We know the Egyptians had hair extensions, they had wigs. It's a long history of hair on the African continent. So 4 themes that I would just like to introduce across some of the different people groups in Africa are age, gender, faith, and occupation. And we'll see how, as we travel to different countries or people groups, how they use hair in these aspects, right? They tell you, you can just tell by how a person looks what their occupation is. You can express your gender or gender expression with a particular hairstyle. So we'll walk through a few of these, and I'll let you know at points when it overlaps with what is in the Textures exhibition. And some of this is other just material from research, like the earlier exhibition from the museum in New York. So the first theme I want to show you is age. Much like Khonshu with his side lock hairstyle that shows his youth, certain hairstyles were indications of different stages, whether you're infant, toddler, young child, older child, etc. So here's an image from 1950 from Cameroon. This particular patch hairstyle, where the entire head is shaved except for this one patch, it was meant to be a protective hairstyle for infants. It would shield the sensitive spot on their skull where the plates have not fully formed and connected yet. So this patch of twisted hair could block potentially dangerous or malevolent spirits from entering into the child. It was seen as a vulnerable spot. And so hair, it's not just physically protective, right? It's not a cushion, it's a shield. There's a spirituality to it. This trio of masks are in our exhibition, and they are very important as they relate to a masquerade tradition. And it's a unique one among all the traditions of West Africa. The secret Sunday society is dedicated to and danced by women from the Mende people group. Across all the other dance masquerade traditions, it's typically men doing the dancing. So though these wooden bundu masks were carved by men, they were animated by women in a coming of age ritual for adolescent girls. The form of the mask depicts the ideal physical and moral traits that the young initiates should strive for as they transition into adulthood. Lustrous black skin, neck rolls to represent health and abundance, miniaturized ears and mouth to reflect femininity and to remind them to avoid gossip. The Sunday masks are also popular for the diversity of hairstyles across the hundreds of examples we have. And here's a historic image from the 19th century where you can see the actual hairstyles on women from this society. So you can do a visual comparison. You can see that there are crests, braids, twists. They're formed into complex sculptural hairstyles and then adorned with ornaments. So while most of the mask's physical attributes of the face are fairly standard, the hair is a space where the carver had creative license, and you could emphasize the individuality of each woman. Other ways that they emphasized beauty as they transitioned from girls into women was that the hair was black, lustrous black, not brown, right? That was the sign of health. And what's really interesting is here in the bottom image, we see their hairstyles so incredibly sculpted, but women were seldom seen without hair ties. So like a scarf covering their hair. So it's interesting that in everyday society, you wouldn't see women's hair that often, but here in the art form, in the mask, it's the rare. It's what's hiding underneath the hair tie. It's the beauty just under the surface. So obviously there's connections between these themes. It's not just age, just gender, because the Sowe masks we just looked at are also obviously about gender standards. So there's overlap between the categories, but a couple I want to show you for gender are the incredible hairstyles of the Balantu or Ovambo women who are in Namibia. You can see that they have incredibly long hairstyles. So at different life stages, women of this ethnic group actually add extensions to their hair. There's also a process by which they add mud bark that's crushed up and natural fats to their hair, and in order to speed up the growing process. So at 12, age 12 and 16, by those ages, they're having this ground length hairstyle that connoted beauty. But then the plates would be folded up, as you see on the left, and they start forming what almost looks like a hat or a sculpture or a crown even, and that signifies that she's married. So that's the transition and shows that you've arrived at that womanly status. The neighboring people group are the Himba women who are in Namibia also. And so this is an image from our exhibition. It's titled Ochitse, which is the material that is in the woman's hair. You see it's kind of a reddish color. It looks like clay. It's actually a mixture of a few different things. It's a paste made from butter, fat, and red ochre. And Himba women apply that to their hair and their skin to give it this iconic red hue. The paste is mostly applied for aesthetic purposes, but the hairstyles themselves are an important aspect of social development. Hairstyles are crafted by close relatives, so it emphasizes the community of women. And they sometimes even incorporate hay, goat hair, or other hair extensions to lengthen the style. An example of a few different crested hairstyles. You see one in a wood carving from the Senufo people, a Fulani woman, and on the right, an Igbo woman. So this crest, we see it a lot across West Africa. For example, the woman on the right, the Igbo woman, is celebrating a marriage. So it's a hairstyle reserved for that. This is another image of a Fulani woman. The hairstyle is known as a jubade, Jubade, in which the hair is stretched across a strip of bamboo that's forming a crest. And you can actually enlarge it by weaving in the hair of ancestors as an extension. So hairstyles like this play an integral role in the lives of Fulani people, and they highlight the continued presence of ancestors even among the living. So you can see it's a generational thing where the hair of one woman is passed down to the next to create that incredible three-dimensional style. Hairstyles have long been used to transmit information about a person's age, social status, and group affinity. And as hair became one of the primary means to express an identity, the tools and instruments used to shape it also evolved in their complexity. So hairpins, and you see here a whole selection that we have in the exhibition, they've been used for thousands of years to hold the hair in place and provide ornamentation to a style. I'll point out the two ivory ones at the bottom. You can see here on a woman from the Mengbetu people. They have a long tradition of using the body as a vehicle for elaborate adornment. The classic hairstyle is created by weaving braided hair into the shape of a vessel, like a basket or a vase, onto the back of the head. It looks like an extension of the head. This one is a simple kind of disc form, and then you see the ivory hairpins embedded into it. They often bought foreign hair, they often included foreign hair, whether they bought it from someone else grew or got synthetic extensions. And even had wigs to get enough hair to create these elaborate hairstyles. The third theme to introduce briefly is faith. It can tell you about your religious affiliation, who you are connected to spiritually. So these are from the Yoruba people group, priests of the god or the Orisha Shango. So you might dedicate your life to a particular god, right? You get initiated, you learn the rituals. What's interesting is that the male priests of Shango have female hairstyles. So in these photos, you see these crested hairstyles, and they have a name. They are named hairstyles, and they're for women. So why would these male religious practitioners have this hairstyle? They actually go through a ritual to metaphorically change from a man's body to a woman's body. And that's so that they can become a wife of the god. There's nothing particularly sexual about this. It's not the same as transgender or gender fluidity. It just is to bring along the connotation of a devoted spouse. You are coming alongside that god, and you are, it's like a marriage commitment. And so they go so far as to have a women's hairstyle, even women's dress, a particular skirt, specifically. And that's a way of saying, I belong to him. I am like his wife, even though it actually changes nothing about their personal gender identity. Other Yoruba hairstyles could indicate if you were married, if you were available but of marrying age. There was even a hairstyle to indicate that you were a spinster, right? So really neat how when we dive into specific cultures, we see these unique stories and how it's very individually expressed. I'll give you one example of occupation, and that would be with the Maasai man. This beautiful image shows a man from modern day Tanzania who belongs to the Maasai peoples. So in the Maasai culture, male warriors are the only ones who are allowed to grow out their hair. This photograph emphasizes his braids to signify his status. Once you became of a certain age, you could grow out your hair. You would have very thinly braided strands that are woven together with wool threads. And frequently you would apply a red pigment also to the hair. After serving as a warrior for between 7 and 10 years, you then came back home and your mother would cut off your head and shave it. So growing up, you would be bald. And then after you finish serving as a warrior, you would be bald as well. So the hairstyle indicates your occupation, your role in life. Where do you fit in with society? And what's your contribution to community at large? As you can see, there are a lot of overlaps between these different themes, whether it's gender and faith with the Shango priest, or age and gender, like the Sowe helmet masks for the Sunday women's initiation. But what is important is, and kind of a through line of our exhibition, is the need for specificity in the stories. Just with this one picture of combs, you can see almost 15 different ethnic groups who are represented. And we would be doing ourselves a disservice to say African hair is ... Or, when we think about hair in Africa, it really ... Because it's really hard to come up with a statement that's true across hundreds of people groups, across hundreds of ethno-linguist groups. And we don't want to flatten because the stories are so culturally specific. So just this image of combs, I could kind of zoom in on the tall wooden ones on the bottom row in the center from Suriname and talk about how those are crafted as wedding gifts. I could talk about the large combs on the top left side, the one with the round head. Those two are both from the Akan peoples in Ghana and include important symbols like the Sankofa bird. So we want to avoid generalizing because if we flatten narratives, we lose all the specifics that make the cultures so unique and their individual histories. And I will pause there and let Dr. Ellington pick up with the other kind of half of this story. What happens once we arrive in the new world?
All right, hello everyone. I'm gonna share my screen with you and get ready for my portion. And so as we begin to discuss what has now happened during the transatlantic slave trade, there are so many different elements to think about. Part of the tradition with hair came down to the idea of how do we survive this atrocity that's going on with us? How do we still, as we're going through these things, how do we try to maintain some of our history, some of our traditions as we're being transported from our home to the quote unquote new world, or to whatever location they were going to be transported to. And in some of those ways, one of the things that was important for Blacks, like I said, is survival, but also too, the Africans had to deal with this new concept of being animalized. As we all know, during slavery times, during the process of transporting slaves, newly encaptured Africans, transporting those individuals over to the New World, there were some dehumanizing activities going on. So of course, shackling these individuals, some of the things that happened in regards to like their hair was shaved off. So as Dr. Joseph just mentioned,
a lot of the times their hair was a representation of their tribe, a representation of their status within the tribe. And so oftentimes slave traders would cut off the hair. They were supposedly, quote unquote, doing that as a way to maintain the health of their newly captured individuals, or really what they were trying to do is kind of, in a way, erasing this whole idea of what identity is. Because as we know, just as, American citizens, our hair is a great identifier for who we are. And in Africa, hair was a symbol of who you were. It was a symbol of what your status was, a symbol of what your job might have been in your particular tribe. And so that was one of the things that they had to face, was having to deal with shaved heads. For those individuals that were able to hold on to their hair, some of them brought over things such as rice seeds, other types of grains, vegetable seeds, and they put those things, and even little pieces of gold, because as we know, Africa is the continent that is filled with riches, and gold is one of those riches. And so they would even put little pieces of gold in their hair just to try to be able to have some way of surviving. And so once enslaved peoples were brought over and began working, they were worked to the bone. They were worked from sun up to sundown. And they oftentimes had no time to take care of their hair, which was critical because, as we know, human beings, we have to have time for hygiene. We have to have time to take care of ourselves. But these individuals were not treated as human beings. They were treated as cattle. They were treated as animals. And so they weren't given time to take care of their hair. And as a result of not having time to take care of their hair, the enslaved Africans suffered scalp diseases. They suffered tremendously matted hair, which, of course, if it's tremendously matted, a lot of times it would just have to be shaved off because there was not much you could do with it. And so one of the things that they did to try to protect their hair, even though they were given no time to take care of their hair, was they would start to wear rags. In the beginning, men and women wore rags. The rags, which we know today as a head wrap, but back then they were just pieces of fabric that they tied around their hair, or old rags that they could find, and they tied those around their hair. Men and women both wore rags. Once the men got access to having hats, then the men switched over and started wearing hats, while the women still wore rags on their hair. And when we're thinking about maps leading to freedom, there's been quite a bit of talk as of late about whether or not this is true. And some historians are, trying to do some research and some diving to find out if really and truly this has really happened. So there's this information out there that's stating that Black individuals, particularly in South America, they were able to create amazing braided hairstyles, and these braided hairstyles allowed them to give each other symbols or give each other maps for helping to for them to escape enslavement. And this particular individual, who is someone of Colombian descent, his family was from Africa, and he was brought over to Colombia from Africa. I think his name is pronounced Bincos Biojo. And he was someone who actually fought for his freedom in the very beginning. He got his freedom, and partially the tale goes that he got his freedom because he instructed the women to create these signs in their hair to signify when it was going to be time for them to leave, what routes to take when it was time. They had this one hairstyle called the departes. Departes was a way in which they parted their hair, they braided it, and they left the braids in almost kind of like a bun formation, almost traditionally what we would think of as Bantu knots. So the departes looked kind of like a Bantu knot, and that particular hairstyle signified that it's time to escape, okay? So these are things that as Black people across the diaspora, we're trying our best to learn as much as we can about who we are. And there's always, you have to figure out whether or not the information is true or false, because we have such a desire, such a want to want to learn as much as we can. But as we know, much of our history has been lost. And so something that we need to think about as we have transitioned from being in our home place in Africa to now being in the New World, with colonization, any place around the globe where there was colonization, there is now this hierarchy that has been built about good hair, bad hair, skin tones, whether you're light skinned or dark skinned. Now we have this colorism and then something I call texturism happening. And there's a hierarchy. So for those individuals in the Americas that were able to work in the house, oftentimes they got privileges. They were oftentimes descendants of the slave trader or the master that owned them at the time. They were oftentimes biracial. And so because they were biracial, they had lighter skin tones, they had straighter hair. And because they were also a descendant of the master, they might have gotten privileges of being able to be educated. As we know, enslaved Africans it was illegal to educate enslaved Africans. So these individuals, lighter skin individuals, individuals with straighter hair, if they were descendants of the master, they may have gotten a chance to learn how to read. They may have had access to better clothing. They might have also had access to better food. And this caused the unspoken divide between the house slave and the field slave, which unfortunately continues to happen today. We still have this unspoken divide amongst ourselves, this colorism and this texturism that we're still dealing with. And we call this phenomenon good and bad hair. In the late 1700s, there was something called the Tshawn Law. The Tshawn Law was enacted by Spanish governor of Louisiana, Esteban Rodriguez Miro, and he is quoted saying that the Negress mulattas can no longer have feathers nor jewelry in their hair. Instead, they must wear their hair plain. And basically this Tshawn Law was a way for the governor to enact this constant resemblance of what enslavement is supposed to look like. I mentioned before that enslaved Africans often wore rags on their hair, and that was a way for them to be able to protect their hair. And so the governor decided that in order for even freed Black women in Louisiana were forced to wear hair rags on their head. But the reason why they wanted them to do that is not only just to signify that they were a part of the race of Black people, but also too, the governor was trying to detract white men from wanting to be able to have relationships. They were trying to make these women less attractive. And in the process, these women became even more attractive because they found amazing ways to style these Tshawns, to add different folds. And as we know, even when I'm looking at these images, it reminds me of the Nigerian culture and how they wrap and fold the gele. Very similar to that. We are given just a piece of fabric and we know how to make it fabulous. And so Louisiana's governor, he was not able to totally detract men, because Black women, if they're beautiful, they're just beautiful women regardless. And so some of the hair care that enslaved Africans had access to didn't quite happen until they were given Sundays to take care of themselves. So after the 1807 US Act of prohibiting the importation of slaves, the slave masters came to realize that I cannot work my slave every single day, day in and day out, without giving them time to rest. And so Sunday became that time for them to rest. So not only did they, spend some time with their family, they oftentimes went to church. This Sunday would be the time when they would actually style their hair. But again, because they were enslaved, they didn't have very many resources. And so the tools that they used to style their hair were very unconventional types of things. So as Dr. Joseph and I were preparing for the exhibition, we had gone to one of our lenders. His name is Dr. Willie Morrow. And Dr. Morrow is the largest lender for our show. We have over 100 pieces from his collection in our show. And we were going through his warehouse, picking up the things that we wanted. And Dr. Morrow told us, well, you have to take the corn grinder. And Dr. Joseph and I had never heard anything about a corn grinder being related to hair. Well, Dr. Morrow explained to us that enslaved Africans would take shucks of corn, they would grind that corn up, make a cornmeal, and then they would use that cornmeal in their hair. That cornmeal would help them to pull out any bugs, any dirt, and really act as a conditioner for the hair. And so they use things such as cornmeal. They even use, in regards to combing their hair, they had to use things such as combing cards that you would use for animal wool. They used utensils such as forks and knives. They also use axle grease on their hair. And then once the whole the idea of straightening the hair became something that they were required to do, because if you worked in the house, you had to be presentable. And some households, presentable meant that you had to straighten your hair. And if you had to straighten your hair, you had to use a clothing iron. And so many enslaved Africans would take a iron that you would put on the stove, and instead of using that as, you would traditionally would for clothing, they actually started using that to straighten their hair. And so 1865, the abolishment of slavery began this whole culture of sharecroppers. The sharecroppers were, of course, formerly enslaved Africans that really had nowhere to go. They had no way to become employed. Oftentimes, even if they had a talent, but the talent was they weren't able to get paid enough to take care of their families based on whatever the talent might have. Maybe they could cut hair, or maybe they could shine shoes, or whatever the case might be. They still weren't able to make enough money. And so oftentimes sharecropping was pretty much the only way that Black people were able to make some kind of a living. Outside of that, what happened was this amazing woman came along. Her name was Annie Turbo Malone. Annie was one of the very first millionaires. She was a chemist, and she began making these incredible hair products. Her company, Poro, was built from the work that she had been doing in the lab. She turned her products into a way of being able to educate Black women. She actually started the very first Black beauty school that she called Poro College. And we were lucky enough with our partnership with Dr. Morrow to be able to actually have some of those authentic Poro College diplomas in our exhibition. And so Annie Malone, she is also the educator of hundreds of Black beauticians across the United States, including Madam Walker. And so when we start thinking about Black economic development, this is where Madam Walker and other people such as Garrett Morgan come into play. They now started making these products that allow Black people to become more employable, to become a partner in this whole framework of economic development. And so Madam Walker and Garrett Morgan were making these hair straightening products. I believe too that Madam Walker even had products that were for skin lightening, or either what they would call skin brightening products, because as we know, it was important not only for Black people, if they wanted to become employable, not only did they have to straighten their hair, but they oftentimes had to lighten their skin as well to be considered acceptable. The Harlem Renaissance provided a bit of Black liberation. However, Black people still were not truly free. They still had a very limited means by which they could live. And so individuals such as Josephine Baker, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, and all these others, they really helped to add a little bit of promise to Black culture. And also too, Langston Hughes and other people that came out of this era began to show Black people that there was more to life than just having the occupation of being a sharecropper. They could become a musician, they could become a hairstylist, they could become a fashion designer. This is when fashion for Black people really started to evolve. And those individuals that had the means to be able to partake in fashion were very much so getting all into it. As you can see, there's a whole phenomenon. We just learned, we had a symposium for the textures exhibition at the middle of April, and we had one of our researchers talking all about Black flappers and how their way of dress was very different than the traditional flapper that we know of today. But these individuals, they had some liberation, but not quite as much as others. The permanency of straight hair. So this is during the time frame when straight hair became something that now was not only something that we had to have in order to become employable, but it became stylish. It became this means by which it was a status symbol, because if you could afford to get your hair permanently straight, then you could afford to go to a beauty salon, which meant you had some money. So straight hair became a status symbol. The permanency of straight hair, this straight chemical that was used to create straight hair, quote unquote, permanently, basically meaning, when I mean by permanent, I mean in the beginning, Black people were straightening their hair with a clothing iron. Eventually they ended up straightening their hair by way of Madam Walker and Garrett Morgan with a straightening comb. But when Jose Calva came onto the scene, he was a chemist, and in the 1940s, he patented a permanent hair straightener. So as we know, Black people's hair still grows from the root as it naturally is, but when you put this hair straightener on, you don't have to straighten it like you do with the straightening comb. And so in the 1940s, this was the first time that Black people could have almost, quote unquote, maintenance-free hair. By the time the 60s came around, there was a great debate what to do with our hair. Many people were deciding whether or not they were still going to assimilate to what overall society told them that beauty was. This whole permanency of straight hair became a debate amongst Black people, especially during the time of the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement. And there were some people saying that, well, if you straighten your hair, you're not truly a Black person. If you straighten your hair, you don't truly have this substance of what it means to be culturally conscious. And so it became a debate. Again, another way of Black culture being divided. And the reason why I put Cicely Tyson in the presentation is because not only was she an amazing actress, but she was also iconic in the hair industry. She was the very first person to wear cornrow hairstyle on TV. She was a part of I think it was CBS's TV show called East Side, West Side, and she wore cornrows. She was the very first person on television to wear cornrows, which, as we know, as we just learned, cornrows is very significant to the African culture, and we've been wearing cornrows for thousands of years. And so for her to do this even before the Civil Rights Movement, this was in 1962. So this was before the Civil Rights Movement. Once the Civil Rights Movement came to be, then people such as Angela Davis and others in the Black Panther Party, they took it a step further and began wearing what they called a natural, okay? Or either they called it an afro. And this was a sign of them accepting themselves as who they were. However, society looked at cornrows and they looked at afros as a way of rebelling against society. In the 1980s, that began the little bit of a shift now. So now we're going from in the 60s and 70s wearing our natural hairstyles to now we're going back to wearing chemically straightened hair. And in this wave, it's actually a very different type of hairstyle. This particular hairstyle is called a jerry curl. The jerry curl was invented by Jerry Redding in the late 1970s. Famous people that we know that wore Jerry curls were people like Michael Jackson, people like Rick James. This the beautiful lady in the blue background is oh my word, what's her name? Felicia Rashad's sister, the dancer. Oh my goodness, her name just escaped me, but I can see her beautiful face, and I
Debbie
remember.
Allen.
Yes, thank you, my dear. Yes, Debbie Allen, right? So Debbie Allen even had a Jerry curl, okay, which goes to show that Jerry Redding was actually able to make millions of dollars off of the Jerry curl product. And I just found out recently from some of the younger people that have been coming to the exhibition, and we've been given tours, they told me that the Jerry curl is coming back in style, and I refuse to accept that. I refuse it. I refuse it.
It is.
Oh my God, Miss Davis, don't tell me that. They need to quit. They need to quit with that.
It's called
Okay.
the curl.
It's called the what?
Gina curl.
Oh, they need to stop it. They need to stop it. They need to stop it. But one of the things that I will say about the Jerry curl is that, and we actually have in our exhibition, we have these jumbo end wraps. We were able to find them in Dr. Morrow's archive. He had a box of these jumbo end wraps from Sally's Beauty Supply. Jumbo end wraps were pieces of like little tissue papers that they would actually use to wrap the end of the hair, and then they would take the end of the hair and wrap them with rollers, and that's how they would get that curly Jerry curl hairstyle. And so during the tours for the presentations, I often talked about the danger that many Black people put their hair in because of this harsh chemical. The Jerry curl was a very, very harsh chemical that Black people wore. I myself, other people that I knew, I had a Jerry curl twice in my life. When I was a young girl, and then I had a Jerry curl when I was like in junior high school and high school, I had a Jerry curl. And so the Jerry curl was very damaging. It was stylish, quote unquote. It was trendy, but it was very damaging to Black people's hair because it dried our hair out. And the reason why it dried our hair out was because of those harsh chemicals. And then because our hair was so dry, we had to douse it with all of this wet product, which did not help it made other issues, right? And so Jerry Redding, even though he was making this product that was dangerous to Black people, he made lots of money off of that. And so the complexities and variations of Black hair today, Black women wear lots of different hairstyles today. And unfortunately, there is still unspoken divide amongst Black women. There are our Black women that wear their hair straight and that wear wigs. That's about 60%, according to Mintel marketing research. About 60% of Black women wear their hair straight or wear weaves. And then about 40% of women wear their hair natural, meaning no chemicals, like no chemical hair straightening products do they use in their hair. And then we have this whole new subset of women. According to the American Academy of Dermatology, about 47% of Black women experience alopecia, and I'm one of those individuals. I've suffered with alopecia for many, many years, and it's now this new thing that we need to start talking about. What exactly is happening with Black hair? We have so many different variations going on, and it's really critical that we look at and analyze why we wear our hair the way that we do. What are we what statement are we putting out to the society about who we are as Black people? What do we want others to see us as when we represent ourselves in society? And so there's some questions that I would like for us to ponder. Where is Black hair culture going in the future? It's hard to say. There's lots of different places that it can go, okay? But I'm praying to God that it's not going to the Jerry curl, okay? And so what can you do as a Black person to acquire a better understanding of your Black history? What can you do to begin to love yourself more as a Black person? Because that is critically the key. A lot of the hairstyles that we wear still have much to do with the fact that we are following society's standard of what beauty is supposed to be. And I'm not saying that I'm someone that's against hair straightening, I'm against wigs or anything like that, but what I am against is people using those types of hairstyling techniques to mask who they truly are. That's what I have a problem with. I don't care if you wear straight hair. I don't care if you wear a wig, but if you're doing it to fit into whatever society's beauty standard is supposed to be, because you don't feel like as just a natural person on your own that you're beautiful enough, that's what I have a problem with. And so what can you do to begin to love yourself more as a Black person? And how can you allow that authentic love that you feel for yourself and your heritage to be present in how you show yourself to the world? How can you do that? How can you authentically love yourself and authentically show yourself to the world? And you can only do that if you are truly wanting to be free. We cannot be free if we are not our authentic selves, right? So those are some questions that I would like for us to ponder. And so I'm going to stop there. And if we have time, I don't know if we'll have time or not, but maybe we can go to some questions.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to acknowledge that Ms. Davis finished the hairstyle, the beautiful hairstyle. So,
Oh
so
my goodness, that's
it's
beautiful,
super
Ms.
beautiful.
Davis.
So go ahead and do a 360.
Yes.
Move it, yeah. So while you're turning your daughter around, would you like to describe this hairstyle and what inspired it?
Okay, so I wanted to be sure that I absolutely had cornrows in this hairstyle because they're very important, as we learned just a few months ago. But actually what inspired this hairstyle, a lot of times I do freestyle braiding, and it's similar to something that I do a lot. However, the elements that needed to be added were the adornments. So this brought it in for me and made me feel as though I was looking at someone who may have worn this in Africa. And so by adorning the hair and giving her, I call this like a crown, and giving her the tendrils with the beads, it kind of brought it in. I know that there are a lot of popular renditions. You can Google African hairstyles. This may pop up because it's very similar to what is being worn a lot. Actually, when I started my career in braiding, just natural hair, when it turned over from everyone being relaxed to being natural, this was one of the styles that was worn a lot, similar. Now the middle would be curled, or it would be, you know, more, it would be hair added to make it a more snug braid. But this is something that this hairstyle actually represents to me the past, the present, and the future. It was a good way to bring all of that together.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. I'm getting a lot of comments saying that it's beautiful, love it, all that great stuff. So again, thank you so much. So first of all, if I only see but one question. If you have any questions, please do not, hesitate to ask some questions in the chat. So but I do have one. Let me find it. So this question is for Dr. Ellington and Dr. Underwood. Can you talk to us about what you found most interesting or what you held to the most while doing this research? What information stuck with you?
The information that stuck with me the most was about the cornmeal, because that was just something that I had absolutely no idea about. And the reason why it was so special is because we heard that story directly from Dr. Morrow, who is a legend in the hair industry. So if you don't know about Dr. Willie Morrow, please go and take a look. Dr. Morrow he started off his career as a barber in the 1950s. I personally found out about him because of all the research that I had been doing with publications about Black hair. He wrote a book called 400 Years Without a Comb. And so that was the first time I'd ever heard about him, was through his book, 400 Years Without a Comb. And once I started doing some more research about him, I found out that he had a collection, an archive of Black hair care products and other items, that he has collected over the years. And so when Dr. Joseph and I had an opportunity to go to San Diego to meet him, which was a total honor that we were able to do that, he talked to us about the significance of cornmeal in the enslaved Africans' hair.
All right, Dr. Underwood, for you, same questions.
I think what's interesting is, as Tamika and I worked on this, it took over 4 years to put the exhibition together and the book, and it just was a lot of time. And then we had the kind of social unrest of 2020, and people were saying, wow, this is such a trendy topic. Like, wow, this is like, and Tamika has been doing this research for decades. The issues, like Dr. Morrow's book is titled, have been going on for centuries. It's not just a trendy topic. It is timely, with things like the passing of the Crown Act and other legislation that's about the protection of different textured hairstyles at school or work. And because we see those news stories all the time of people getting sent home from school or fired from their job, or and so I think the way that, as we worked on this over the course of 4 years, that people viewed it in different lenses based on what was happening in the real world. We were doing the work no matter what, but it was just interesting how everyone was responding differently at different times.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't want to bring it up, because every time I think about it, it just pisses me off when I think about it, because for others to think that this is a timely topic really shows that in many cases they had no clue. We as Black people, we have to learn about other people. We have to learn about the dominant society because we're a part of it, but they don't have to learn about us. They don't have to know anything about us. And that was just proof right there that they had no clue. And it just infuriated me, because I hear somebody, Tawanda, exactly, absolutely, Tawanda, absolutely. Yeah. So thank you, Joseph, for bringing that up, because I was not about to bring it up.
So this question is for Dr. Underwood. What drew your interest to reach and understand Black hair?
Oh, good question. So I'm an art historian. I study art and art objects, and you kind of have to pick a field, right? You're going to study Asian art, you're going to study French art, and over a decade ago, I chose African art. I had spent some time in Senegal. I was also a French major, and I learned French, and I wanted to keep going back. And I'm actually flying back on Monday for the first time after the pandemic, and I'm going to see my friends in Senegal and look at art, and it's going to be great. And so when I arrived at Kent State 5 years ago, that's where Dr. Ellington was a professor at the same time, and she just approached me on day one and said, hey, you know about art museums, you know about putting together exhibitions, like, you know about Africa, and so that's been the collaboration, right? She brings kind of the African-American story. I've got Africa research. That's kind of what made it a global thing. It's also the history and the contemporary. So, I mean, really, Dr. Ellington's research and passion for the topic is what got me into Black hair specifically. Even though I've researched culture and art, I had not looked at hair in depth, but I think we were able to do a lot as a team where I could be like, hold on, I don't know what that means. So we need to be sure that that translates to non-Black visitors. And then it went the opposite way too, where I said, oh, well, normally the museum does this. And Dr. Ellington's like, that's not gonna work for Black audiences. And so it was a really good push and pull. I mean, from art history to fashion, from lived experience to, an ally and a community member. Cause I mean, Tamika talked about what frustrated her. The thing that frustrates me is when people say, this is a niche topic. It's like, it's an exhibition for Black people. And I'm like, if you're a citizen who votes, then you should probably know something about this. You should be engaged.
So that's so spot on, Dr. Underwood. How do we archive our own hair care products that we once thought had no value? Where do we take these items we've kept?
I think I saw that comment in this. I think that might be something that you might be able to talk to Dr. Underwood about preservation and how to preserve hair products that we have now?
Yeah, so you're probably not gonna be able to preserve the product itself, but as the art historian and kind of museum person, you can preserve canisters. So clean them out, make sure all kind of, especially chemicals are removed, and they kind of just sit in your garage until it's timely topic for somebody to, to get into. And I think if you, have 5 or 6 hair products from the 80s, that's not of a lot of interest to a museum. But if you can somehow come up with, I've got 150 that range from the 70s, if you kind of have a collection of something, it's more appealing to a museum or an archive than just kind of one-off things. Otherwise, you could think of things like flea markets. I've seen some really neat, you can't even buy a Madam C.J. Walker tin anymore because they're so expensive, just, in flea markets.
So this question is for Ms. Davis. Do you have any general recommendations for people, kids, parents, who are just becoming familiar with their natural hair?
Okay, yes, I do. Firstly, you want to make sure that you can identify the type of texture you have. The most important thing with our type of textures is to have moisture, so that the hair is healthy. And then I always encourage people to get into a hairstylist. Find a cosmetologist that can help you. I know there's a lot of things going on YouTube and things like that, but we are the ones that have learned how to take care of the hair, and we can give you the best ideas on how to help maintain, we can help you with the goals that you have for your hair and for your children's hair. I always say, if you want to know about a subject, go to someone who knows about the subject. I would encourage you, wherever you are, to, if you have someone, reach out to them and get an appointment. First of all, have a consultation so that you can talk about your hair, talk about your children's hair, so that you can understand it better. And most hairstylists, most licensed cosmetologists would enjoy to help you understand your hair. You don't always have to come in. That's not always the goal. The goal is for you to be happy with what grows from inside of your hair. That's the goal. So get in with someone, and, find out about your hair and what tools and products work best for you.
Great. That's sound advice. I'm going to do 2 more questions, and then we'll be that'll be the end of the question and answer period. So this is from somebody in the audience. I want to ask about the issue of white people wearing Black hairstyles. What is the fine line of appropriation and appreciation?
Well, that's something that I've been doing some research on for quite some time as well. A person such as Kim Kardashian that just, wears what we call French braids, or like the way that they style their hair, Fulani braids, wearing that kind of hairstyle. It's just a straight ripoff. I think that the reason why it's so detrimental is because when Black people wear those hairstyles, they're demeaned for those hairstyles. They are told that they're not professional. But then when a white person wears those hairstyles, they're seen as trendy, as chic, and so that's where the rub comes into play, is that there is still this, we're still fighting for the right to be able to wear our hair the way that we want to wear it via the Crown Act. However, we have other people, white people in our society, that are still wearing their hair, and now they call them these new, what they call boxer braids. Boxer braids are nothing but cornrows, right? Nothing but cornrows that they have taken from our culture. And honestly, when it comes to wearing certain hairstyles, appropriation really is the only, I don't think that there's really a way that you can be quote unquote inspired by Black hair without wearing a Black hairstyle. I don't think that there's a way that you can do it where it's not just appropriation. And especially too, because the topic is such a sensitive topic. And very similar to, you know, our Native brothers and sisters that get appropriated often. You know, individuals like Victoria's Secret, when they had their fashion shows and they would put their models in these huge tribal headdresses, right? They were doing that for fashion's sake, but they were also very much so appropriating. So I don't think that you can be, I guess, somewhat inspired by, but if you're gonna wear a full-on traditional, you know, chieftaincy headpiece that natives will wear, that's appropriation. There's no way around that, you know? I don't know that, I mean.
Oh, no, that's great.
Yeah.
So may Dr. Ellington discuss the still lingering effects of certain rules involving Black hairstyles? We've heard stories of school children being forced to cut their hair unwittingly if they're wearing braids, cornrows, dreads, etc. Could you discuss why there's still this desire to control Black hairstyles?
Racism, we still have racism, so there it is.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Okay.
Period, point blank.
Right. So the very, very last question. So this is for Ms. Davis. So she said, great point in finding a stylist. What do you suggest when people get discouraged when trying to schedule consultations for hair and there are so many hoops to jump through? I've been noticing this conversation on my social media feeds.
Okay, so what is happening in the hairstylist community, in the beauty community, is that we're going online. There used to be direct access to us. You had our phone number. We were like your best friend. And what I'm finding is that a lot of us are making it more of a business transaction, and it's kind of a transition for the client to be able to catch up with. Again, you can still have customer service, and you can be kind and you can be, you know, caring. But that's what I find is happening. I am an online booker myself. And I do that so that it allows you, and I'm sure this is what is going on, it allows you to have access to the schedule. You can book on the time that you have. We don't always have time to communicate with you outside of when you get into the salon, because we're very busy working with the clients that we have at the moment. So it's more like being run like a business versus a hobby. So that's what I'm finding is happening. And on behalf of all hairstylists, I'll say we don't mean any harm by it. We're just trying to come into the 21st century and be able to run our businesses. Online happened because the salons were shut down. You know, we were shut down during, you know, what happened. And so that caused a lot of us to reevaluate. I've been online for a while, but it caused a lot of people stylists to reevaluate how they're spending their time, what can be done more effective, what can be done efficiently. So I'll say this, if you're having trouble getting in with a particular stylist that you're trying to get in, that's a good thing for the stylist, bad thing for you, but keep on trying. If that's someone you want to be with, keep on trying for them. If not, you know, they're secondary people. Their hairstyling is so huge. And there's always going to be someone available to be able to help you.
Well, thank you. That's a great way to close the question and answer part. Thank you for the insightful questions and comments in the chat. Dr. Underwood, Dr. Ellington, and Ms. Davis, does any one of you have any parting words to share or anything you would like to promote?
I just want to say thank you for inviting us to do this. We were excited about, you know, being able to be a part of some of the history of, contributing to the Freedom Center. So we were very excited about that. So thank you.
Dr. Underwood?
I just echo that and say we can't wait to see you all in Kent before the exhibition closes in mid-August.
There you go. Ms. Davis?
I echo as well. Thank you so much. It's just a great thing that I was able to do this in front of the audience and alongside these doctors who have studied and learned and researched. It's an honor.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us for the great conversation about Black hair. This experience inspired me to reflect on my own hair journey. I hope this conversation will help audiences understand how hair is important to the Black community, how it is a form of expression, and it's paramount to our identity. I would like to, first of all, before I say my special thanks to the panelists, I want to send a special shout out to two Freedom Center colleagues. First, Sarah Donato, a rock star content a digital content manager who helped us with the technical needs. And I also would like to thank Asia Harris, our youth coordinator, who had the brilliant idea of suggesting Ms. Davis to include in our live presentation. And so lastly, I would like to say a special thanks to Dr. Underwood, Dr. Ellington, and Ms. Davis for their wonderful presentations, and to the audience for spending your time with us. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.